Daniel Clark was the kind of man who made people lower their guard. His voice carried the softness of someone who'd known heartbreak, his smile practiced just enough to seem real. The neighbors called him a gentle soul, the kind who watered flowers even after sundown, and sent Christmas cards to those who forgot him. Every Sunday morning he was seen tending to his late wife's memorial garden, white lilies and pale roses, carefully arranged around a framed photograph of Emily Clark. The sight drew sympathy, even admiration. He never stopped loving her, they'd say, but inside that quiet suburban house, Daniel's love had never truly died. It had simply changed form. The living room still smelled faintly of Emily's lavender perfume, preserved in drawers and forgotten scarves. Her wedding ring, the one he said was lost, rested in a locked jewelry box beside his bed. Every object told a story Daniel wanted others to believe, the story of a widower who couldn't move on. He rehearsed it daily in the mirror, in the silence between his breaths. The truth lay buried beneath layers of performance, a truth he guarded as fiercely as the garden outside. At night, Daniel would sit by the window with a cup of tea, staring into the reflection of his own home. The flicker of the porch light shimmered against the glass, and sometimes he thought he saw Emily's shape behind him. Soft, accusing, patient. "I'm still here," she seemed to whisper. He never turned around. Instead, he smiled faintly, murmuring, "I know." During the day, he was the neighborhood's quiet helper. He carried groceries for the elderly widow across the street, fixed the school fence when storms tore it down, and donated to charity in Emily's name. It wasn't guilt that drove him, it was the performance of it all. He believed that if he played the part long enough, the world would never question what really happened 3 years ago. That illusion began to tremble the morning a new tenant moved in next door. She was younger, inquisitive, with a notepad always tucked under her arm. Her name was Sophie, though Daniel didn't yet know it. From her window she could see his garden, the flowers, the memorial plaque, the man who spoke to himself while pruning dead stems. As Daniel placed fresh lilies near Emily's picture, he felt eyes watching. He looked up only for a second and saw the flick of a curtain. A faint unease rippled through him, like the echo of a buried memory rising toward the surface. He turned back to the garden, forcing a smile, his hand trembling slightly as he whispered to the framed photograph, "Don't worry, darling. They still believe you're gone." 3 years earlier, the Clark house looked almost the same porch, same white fence, but its silence carried a different weight. The storm that night was relentless, rain slashing against the windows like nails. Inside, Emily Clark paced the living room floor, her hands trembling around a phone she couldn't bring herself to use. Every sound made her flinch, the wind against the shutters, the clock ticking too loudly, and Daniel's voice from upstairs calling her name in that low, measured tone that once comforted her. She'd packed a small suitcase hours before, hidden beneath the bed, filled with only essentials, a passport, some cash, a photograph of her sister, and the house key she promised herself never to return with. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman unrecognizable, pale, hollow-eyed, caught between fear and guilt. She whispered, almost pleading, "Just one more night. Just one more chance to leave." But the walls seemed to listen, their silence pressing against her skin. At 11:47 p.m., she finally stepped outside. The rain soaked her instantly, but the cold air felt like freedom. Her car keys jingled as she ran toward the gate, until a familiar shadow appeared at the window. Daniel was there, half hidden behind the curtain, watching, his expression unreadable. She froze, her breath catching. Then the porch light flicked on. Hours later, the neighbors would recall hearing a car start, then stop, followed by muffled shouting, too faint to make sense of. No one intervened. They thought it was just another argument between a couple trying to survive grief. By morning, Emily's car was gone. Her phone found abandoned near the highway, and Daniel, calm and composed, was already reporting her missing. The police questioned him gently. His sorrow looked too convincing. She'd been distant, he told them, eyes glistening. Maybe she needed space. He spoke with pauses, sighs, practiced restraint. The detectives nodded sympathetically, labeling it a voluntary disappearance. But buried in the evidence logs was a single overlooked clue, a voicemail Emily had left on her sister's phone that night. Static-filled, broken by thunder, her voice whispered, "If I don't make it, tell them Daniel knows why." The message was never followed up. The case went cold. Daniel returned to his garden, to his lilies, to his perfect image. 3 years later, the same garden bloomed again, and Sophie, the new neighbor, found herself staring at those flowers, unaware that beneath their roots lay a story the storm hadn't washed away. Sophie Marin moved into the house next to Daniel's in late spring, unaware that her curiosity would soon consume her. She had chosen the quiet suburb for its peace, but on her first night, the air felt oddly heavy, as though the place remembered something it shouldn't. The old neighbors were polite but hesitant, lowering their voices whenever she mentioned the man next door. "He's been through a lot," they'd say. "Lost his wife, kind man. Keeps to himself." But Sophie knew the name Emily Clark. 3 years ago, she'd written a brief column about the woman's disappearance, just another cold case that faded from public interest. Seeing Daniel's house again, the pristine garden glowing under the porch light, felt like walking into one of her unfinished sentences. From her kitchen window, she often saw Daniel in that garden. Midnight, sometimes later, with a shovel glinting faintly under the moon. He moved with purpose, slow and deliberate, as though tending to something fragile, or hiding something precious. Once she heard the sound of metal scraping stone, followed by a faint thud. When she peered out, Daniel was gone, only the garden swaying under a restless breeze. During the day, he seemed perfectly normal, too normal. Polite greetings, occasional smiles, always measured. Yet Sophie noticed his eyes lingered too long when people spoke, as if assessing their motives. There was something rehearsed about his grief, the way he still spoke of Emily in the present tense. "She loves white lilies," he once said, catching himself too late. Sophie didn't respond, but her journalist's instinct flared. She began taking notes. Time, 12:42 a.m., lights still on. Sounds, digging, water running. The smell from his backyard one night was unbearable, like decay masked with bleach. She jotted that down too. Curiosity was becoming compulsion. Her pen trembled as she wrote. One evening, she walked past his gate and saw Daniel standing near the water tank, staring into it with an expression she couldn't read, half fear, half nostalgia. Their eyes met. He smiled faintly, but something about it made her step back. It wasn't a smile of kindness, it was recognition. Later that night, as rain began to fall, Sophie replayed the memory of Emily Clark's missing person photo on her laptop screen. The resemblance between the smiling woman in the picture and the uneasy shadow in Daniel's garden was haunting. She whispered to herself, "I think I've seen her ghost." And outside, Daniel's porch light flickered, once, twice, before going completely dark. The rain had not stopped since the night Sophie saw Daniel by the water tank. It drummed endlessly against her window, as if urging her to keep digging. The journalist in her was awake now, restless, alert, and unwilling to let go. When she learned that Daniel's attic had been part of an estate sale years earlier, curiosity turned into a plan. A few discreet questions to the old real estate agent, a polite smile, and soon Sophie found herself holding a box of discarded belongings labeled Mrs. Clark, personal. She opened it on her kitchen floor, the smell of paper and dust thick in the air. Inside lay a stack of unsent letters, their ink faded but words sharp enough to wound. Each one began the same way. "Dear Lily, I don't know who else to tell." Emily's handwriting trembled across the pages. The first few letters spoke of loneliness, of Daniel's subtle coldness, how his compliments felt like warnings, how he tracked her every move under the guise of concern. "He says I forget things that never happened," one line read. "Sometimes I start to believe him." Another, "He told me he can't lose me again, but I don't remember when he ever did." Sophie's throat tightened as she read on. Each letter unraveled another thread of Emily's life. The isolation, the gaslighting, the fear disguised as affection. One letter ended abruptly, mid-sentence, with a blot of ink like a tear. The date, 3 days before Emily vanished. Lightning flashed outside, and Sophie felt an icy realization crawl up her spine. These weren't just letters. They were confessions written by someone who knew she was being erased piece by piece. The last envelope was heavier, sealed, and never opened. Inside was a single photograph. Emily in the garden, smiling nervously beside Daniel. Behind them, faint but visible, was the rooftop water tank. On the back, scrawled in shaky ink, were the words, "He said love means staying, even if it kills me." Sophie pressed the photo to her chest, her pulse thundering. The puzzle pieces were aligning into something unspeakable. From her window, she saw Daniel again, standing motionless in the rain, staring up at her lighted window. For the first time, Sophie looked away, because she finally understood what Emily had been trying to escape. And she knew, with chilling certainty, that Daniel would soon realize she'd found the letters. The smell came first, faint at dawn. Sour by noon, unbearable by evening. It drifted through the neighborhood, clinging to the humidity like rot that refused to fade. Children covered their noses as they passed Daniel's house. One neighbor muttered about a dead raccoon in the pipes. Daniel, of course, apologized profusely for the inconvenience, promising to have it checked. His tone was measured, his concern rehearsed, but his eyes, those calm, glassy eyes, betrayed something else entirely. By the next morning, a city maintenance van parked outside. 2 workers climbed onto Daniel's roof, their boots thudding softly as they moved toward the large, rust-stained water tank. Daniel stood below with folded arms, pretending curiosity, though every sound from above tightened the muscles in his jaw. The younger worker shouted down, "Sir, the smell's coming from inside." "Might be an animal caught in the system." Daniel forced a small smile. "An animal? That explains a lot," he replied, but his voice faltered on the last word. From her window, Sophie watched the scene unfold, camera in hand, every instinct screaming to record. She saw the way Daniel shifted his weight, his eyes darting to the hatch again and again. When one of the men began unscrewing the lid, Daniel took a step forward, almost panicked. "Be careful," he said quickly. "Those bolts are fragile, don't damage the seal." The worker nodded, oblivious. The metal groaned as the hatch lifted. A wave of stench rolled over them, heavy, unmistakable, human. Both men recoiled, gagging, while Daniel's face froze in a strange expression, part horror, part acceptance. His lips parted, but no words came. Sophie's camera clicked, catching his reaction through the drizzle. His calm mask cracked for the first time. For a split second, he looked directly at her window, and she instinctively stepped back into the shadows. The workers scrambled down, shouting for the police. Daniel stood still, rain darkening his shirt, the sound of sirens already echoing from a distance. His eyes drifted upward, toward the tank, then downward toward the garden below, toward everything he had buried. When the first officer arrived, Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. "It must be her. It has to be her." From across the street, Sophie trembled behind her lens, her breath shallow. She had wanted the truth. Now she couldn't unsee it. And as blue lights flashed across the wet pavement, she realized this was only the beginning. By the time the police arrived, the street was already crowded with onlookers, neighbors, reporters and strangers drawn by morbid curiosity. The flashing lights painted Daniel's house in alternating shades of red and blue, transforming his immaculate garden into a stage for something unspeakable. The air reeked of decay, and whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through leaves. Detective Laura Hayes stepped out of her car, a sharp, composed figure amid the chaos. She took one look at Daniel, calm, neatly dressed, hands folded behind his back, and her instincts bristled. "You're the homeowner?" she asked. "Yes," Daniel said softly. His eyes were steady, his tone courteous, almost gentle. "They said something was found in the tank." His words stopped there, suspended between pretense and confession. The workers stood pale and trembling beside the ladder leading up to the rooftop tank. "Ma'am, you'll want to see this yourself," one stammered. Laura climbed up, flashlight in hand. The metallic lid had been forced open, and inside the murky water floated a shape too human to deny. Layers of plastic clung to decomposing flesh, hair tangled like seaweed, a faint glimmer of metal catching the light. Laura's breath hitched when she saw the ring, gold, thin, simple. "A wedding band," she called down quietly. "Get forensics, now." As officers began taping off the property, Daniel stood motionless. His neighbors stared, expecting him to collapse, to cry, to scream. But he only tilted his head slightly, as though examining a puzzle. His face held no shock, only curiosity. When Laura approached, her voice was careful. "Mr. Clark, the remains appear to be female. Do you recognize?" Daniel looked at her, eyes glassy and unreadable. "That's not my wife," he whispered. The words were calm, almost tender, like a lullaby. Gasps spread through the crowd. Cameras clicked. A woman in the back began to cry, but Daniel simply turned toward his house, staring at the window where Sophie once stood. He could feel her eyes on him, the weight of her silent accusation. Sophie, hidden behind her curtains, pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. She had made the anonymous call hours earlier, but now guilt coursed through her veins like ice. She wanted justice, not spectacle. Yet here it was, raw, unstoppable, staring back through Daniel's calm denial. As the coroner's van pulled up, Daniel whispered something only he could hear. "You shouldn't have looked there." And from her window, Sophie felt the words, though they never reached her ears. The room was small, square, and deliberately cold. The fluorescent light above hummed faintly, casting sterile shadows across the metal table where Daniel Clark sat with his fingers loosely interlaced. Across from him, Detective Laura Hayes watched. Silence, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside her notepad. She had dealt with killers before, men who wept, raged, begged. But Daniel's calm unsettled her more than any confession ever could. He sat perfectly straight, his breathing steady. "You must think I'm a monster," he said at last, voice soft, almost apologetic. Laura leaned back. "I don't think anything yet, Mr. Clark, I just listen." He smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth barely moving. "Listening is dangerous. People start to believe what they want to hear." His words were smooth, deliberate, too polished. Laura recognized performance when she saw it. Every answer he gave was precise, controlled, an attempt to narrate his own innocence. When she mentioned the water tank, his expression didn't change. "Tragic," he murmured. "To think someone used my home for that." She slid a photo across the table, the wedding ring recovered from the remains. "Recognize this?" Daniel's eyes flicked toward it, then away. "It looks like Emily's, but it can't be hers. My wife is gone." "Gone where?" Laura pressed. He hesitated just long enough for truth to tremble between them. "Away," he finally said. "People leave all the time. Some just forget to come back." Laura studied him carefully. Behind his measured words lay something fractured, a quiet arrogance shaped by years of control. She changed tactics. "Tell me about your marriage, Daniel. Was she happy?" He chuckled softly, almost wistful. "Happiness is overrated. Emily was loved. That's what matters." "Loved," Laura repeated, her tone sharp as glass. "You sure that's what she'd call it?" For the first time, his mask faltered. His fingers tightened, knuckles whitening. "You wouldn't understand," he said quietly. "When you love someone enough, you can't let them destroy themselves." There it was, the slip. Destroy themselves, not leave, not run. A phrase soaked in control, in possession. Laura's pulse quickened. She wrote it down slowly, her gaze never leaving his face. Daniel noticed. His smile returned, faint but brittle. "Careful, detective," he whispered. "You're starting to sound like her." Outside the one-way glass, Sophie watched through the observation window, her stomach twisting. She couldn't yet tell who was winning, the detective or the man who'd turned love into a crime. Detective Laura Hayes had spent the night reviewing every record, every transaction, every detail of Daniel Clark's seemingly flawless life. Somewhere between the bank statements and the late-night hotel receipts, a name surfaced: Claire Donovan. A florist from the next town over. The timestamp on the first receipt dated back to 6 months before Emily's disappearance. The perfect husband, it seemed, hadn't always been grieving. Laura found Claire 2 days later, sitting in a dim cafe, hands wrapped around a chipped mug. Her eyes darted constantly toward the door, as if expecting Daniel to walk in at any moment. "You're here about him, aren't you?" she whispered before Laura even asked. "Yes," Laura replied, voice steady. "I need to know what he was like with you." Claire laughed, soft, bitter. Like a dream at first, charming, attentive, he made me feel chosen, but it didn't last. She hesitated, glancing down at her trembling hands. He hated when I went out with friends, said he worried about me. When I didn't answer the phone once, he waited outside my apartment all night, smiling, just watching. Laura took notes, her pen moving quickly. Did he ever mention Emily? The question froze Claire mid-breath. All the time, she said finally. He said she misunderstood him, that she broke something inside him. He said people should be loyal no matter how much it hurts. Her voice cracked. One night, he told me Emily deserved her silence. When I asked what he meant, he just smiled and said, "Some people don't know when to stop talking." The cafe's hum faded beneath the weight of her words. Claire wiped a tear with the back of her hand. I left him the next morning. He followed me for weeks, calls, letters, showing up at work. I had to move to get away. Laura felt the pieces clicking into place, the jealousy, the control, the way Daniel turned affection into ownership. He hadn't loved Emily. He'd possessed her. And when she tried to leave, he'd ensured she never could. As Laura stood to go, Claire reached out, gripping her wrist. "Detective, don't underestimate him. He doesn't lose, not even when he's caught." Outside, Laura's phone buzzed. A message from the forensic lab. Preliminary DNA results from the water tank confirm match. Emily Clark. The truth was now undeniable. But what Laura didn't know, what no one yet saw, was the calm smile forming on Daniel's face as he sat alone in his cell, whispering, "Finally, she's come home." They wanted Daniel to confess, but he didn't see it that way. To him, there was nothing to confess, only to explain. "Love," he said softly into the recorder, "isn't what people think it is. It's not freedom. It's not chaos. It's safety. It's control. Because when you truly love someone, you don't let them destroy themselves with choices they don't understand." The tape captured his calm tone, the faint echo of pride behind every word. To Daniel, love had always been a structure, a system that needed obedience. Emily was never meant to resist. She was different, he murmured, eyes distant, too gentle for the world. I had to protect her, from herself. In his memory, Emily was still alive. She stood in their kitchen, trembling as he cornered her after another argument. Her hands clutched a suitcase. His hand rested over hers, deceptively tender. "You keep packing," he told her, voice low. "But where will you go that I can't find you?" She had whispered, "I just want peace." And he had smiled sadly. "Then stay, and you'll have peace forever." He remembered the night clearly, the rain, the silence after, the thud of finality. The stillness that followed felt sacred. He told himself he'd saved her from the chaos of leaving, from the cruelty of the world beyond their home. She looked so calm, he said. Finally quiet, finally safe. Daniel leaned back in the interrogation chair, his gaze drifting toward the mirrored glass. "They'll never understand. I didn't kill her. I kept her. She's still here. Every morning I see her face in the garden. She's part of me." Detective Laura Hayes, watching from the observation room, felt her stomach tighten. His words weren't madness. They were order, a structured insanity rooted in ownership. Every "I loved her" carried the weight of "I owned her." Daniel's voice softened again, almost nostalgic. "You see, love doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes form. Water, earth, silence. She's in all of it. She never really left." He smiled faintly, as if proud of the devotion he described. "People will call it murder," he whispered, "but they'll never see what I built. I made her mine forever." Laura pressed stop on the recorder, her hands trembling. His words had crossed from confession to poetry, dark, deliberate poetry. And outside the room, Sophie waited in the corridor, unaware that Daniel had just rewritten the meaning of love entirely. The courthouse was packed, the air heavy with anticipation and whispered speculation. Cameras lined the back, reporters scribbled frantically, and jurors shifted uneasily in their seats. Daniel Clark entered quietly, his posture impeccable, his expression serene. The crowd expected a man broken by guilt, Instead, they found someone composed, almost untouchable. The defense painted a picture of a grieving widower, emphasizing the tragedy of a husband forced to live with loss for 3 years. Soft photographs of Emily smiled from slides, gentle music played quietly, and Daniel's measured, calm testimony was delivered with such vulnerability that some jurors' eyes glistened. "I loved her more than anything," he whispered, "and I mourn her every single day." Then came the prosecution. They dismantled his facade piece by piece, presenting the evidence of control, manipulation, and the water tank itself. Forensic reports detailed decomposition, positioning, and concealment. Surveillance footage of Daniel digging at night, the unsent letters Emily wrote, and Claire's testimony painted him as calculating, meticulous, and chillingly detached. Sophie was called next. She walked forward, trembling, notebook in hand, heart hammering. I watched him," she said, voice quivering. "I saw the garden at night. I saw the water tank, and I found the letters. He wasn't grieving. He was waiting." Her hands shook violently, and the courtroom was silent but for her words. Daniel's eyes met hers, calm and unblinking. There was no malice, only recognition, almost gratitude. Sophie's stomach turned. It was the look of a man who knew he had been discovered, yet welcomed it, as though her witness solidified the world he had constructed rather than threatened it. Public opinion began to shift. Whispers that Daniel was a victim of circumstance turned into gasps and murmurs of horror. Social media exploded outside the courthouse, debating how a man could appear so gentle while hiding such darkness. Laura Hayes watched him in the defendant's box, noting every micro-expression. His confidence remained intact, unshaken. He was playing the final hand, and for him, this trial was another stage on which he would perform the truth, or his version of it. And as the judge called for a brief recess, Daniel leaned slightly toward Sophie and murmured just loud enough for her to hear, "Thank you. You made them see." The words chilled her to the bone. The diary was tucked away in a false bottom of Emily's old dresser, a piece of furniture Daniel had left untouched for years. Laura's gloved hands lifted it carefully, the leather worn and cracked, as if it had absorbed years of silent suffering. The pages smelled faintly of lavender, dust, and forgotten sorrow. She flipped through the entries, each line growing heavier, more desperate than the last. Emily wrote of sleepless nights, of the subtle tightening of Daniel's control. "He checks my phone, my messages, even my friends. He says it's love, but it feels like chains," one passage read. Another detailed a confrontation. "He said I couldn't leave. He smiled when I cried. I love him, but I'm terrified of him." Laura felt a lump in her throat. The diary was a timeline of terror masked as devotion. The final entry was different. The handwriting, once shaky, was resolute. "If I disappear, know that love killed me, not a stranger. He will make it look like grief, but it is possession. Beware anyone who watches silently. They may witness the truth too late." The words were chilling in their clarity, a quiet scream that had gone unheard. During the trial, Laura presented the diary. The courtroom went silent as she read Emily's words aloud. Each sentence exposed the lies Daniel had lived behind, the careful mask of grief he had worn for 3 years. Jurors' eyes widened. Reporters scribbled furiously. Sophie, sitting in the back, gripped her notebook tightly, barely able to breathe. Daniel's face remained calm, but for the first time there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. The diary shattered the story he had rehearsed so meticulously. He was no longer the grieving husband. He was the orchestrator of a nightmare that had lasted too long. When Laura closed the book, the silence stretched uncomfortably, as if the courtroom itself held its breath. Emily's truth hung in the air, undeniable, suffocating. The spectators whispered, the press cameras clicked, and Daniel's carefully constructed world began to crumble before him. He lowered his gaze, finally acknowledging what had always been there, hidden beneath the guise of love. Emily's voice, preserved on the fragile pages, had freed her, and in doing so, it condemned the man who had claimed her life as devotion. The mask was gone. Months had passed since the trial, and the town that once whispered about Daniel Clark now readied itself for the story's final retelling. Sophie stood on the roof of Daniel's house, camera in hand, the wind tugging at her hair. The water tank, Once a vessel of horror sat empty and sealed, its metal surface dull in the afternoon sun. The neighborhood was quiet, the air still thick with memory. She inhaled deeply, trying to steady the weight of everything she had witnessed. This was a house of love, she began, speaking softly into the camera. Or at least, what looked like love. But behind closed doors, devotion became possession, care became control, and a marriage, once a partnership, became a prison. Her gaze lingered on the garden below, where white lilies and pale roses still grew, symbols of Emily's memory and Daniel's obsession. Sophie recounted each revelation as the camera captured her, the sunlight glinting off the leaves like shards of glass. She spoke of Emily's letters, the unsent confessions, and the diary that finally told the truth beneath years of silence. Her voice wavered slightly when she described the moment the tank was opened. The grotesque evidence of a love twisted into something deadly. Later, her footage would include the interview with Daniel in prison. He spoke with the same soft cadence that had unnerved detectives and jurors alike. "People think she's gone," he said, staring directly into the lens, unblinking. "But she never left me. She's still part of this house, part of me. You can see her if you know where to look." His calm smile was the same one that had chilled Sophie 3 years earlier. The same one that masked a mind entirely convinced of its own righteousness. The documentary cut between Sophie's narration and Daniel's chilling admission, the juxtaposition highlighting the horror of how love had been weaponized. Viewers would see the garden, the empty tank, the house bathed in sunlight, and feel the oppressive shadow of obsession that lingered even after death. As Sophie finished filming, she stepped back from the tank, her heart still pounding. She had documented the truth, preserved it for the world. Yet she could not shake the feeling that the house itself remembered, that Daniel's presence lingered in the silence in the walls, in the carefully tended garden. Looking one last time at the rooftop and the empty tank, she whispered to herself, "Love can save. Or it can kill." And in the distance, Daniel's words echoed, though only in memory. "She never left me. She's still part of this house,